The new female president of the company fired me on her first day here. Her reason was that I slacked off at work. I didn't care. After all, the company belonged to my family. But I never expected that when I pushed open my front door. A pair of eye-catching red high heels would be sitting right on my shoe rack. From the bathroom came the sound of rushing water. Chin Fang Human Resources Department. 2 years on the job. 321 attendance irregularities. And over 1,000 hours of total time spent browsing irrelevant websites during working hours. Is my summary correct? In the conference room, the air was so cold it felt like shards of ice could fall from it. Everyone kept their heads down, not daring to take a loud breath. The woman speaking was Su Qingyan, the newly appointed president of our company. A well-tailored black suit accentuated her striking figure, but her face was colder than a Siberian cold snap. This was her first day in office, and at her very first meeting, the first person she called out was me. I lifted my head and met her gaze. She was beautiful, a kind of beauty with sharp, aggressive edges, phoenix eyes, red lips, and skin that glowed pale. Yet her eyes looked at me as if I were a piece of trash that needed to be disposed of immediately. The senior supervisor next to me was sweating so much his shirt was nearly soaked, and he kicked my foot frantically under the table. I nodded calmly. President Su's summary is perfectly accurate. There was nothing wrong with it. I transmigrated here 2 years ago, inheriting this massive business empire along with the original owner's last wish to simply lie flat and do nothing. I left everything in the hands of my overachieving subordinates and found myself a random position at the lowest level subsidiary of the group, just an idle employee slacking off every day. I worked out, studied the 8 major cuisines, brewed a little wine, and lived an incredibly comfortable life. Who knew my good days would end today? Su Qingyan seemed not to expect me to admit it so readily, and her delicate eyebrows lifted slightly. The vice president beside her stood up immediately and pointed at me righteously. Chin Fang. What kind of attitude is that? The company doesn't pay you to mess around. One bad apple spoils the whole barrel. I looked at Vice President Wang and remembered who he was. He was apparently the brother-in-law of some distant relative of mine. Got the job through connections, and was always the best at sucking up to people. Now he was trying to show his loyalty to his new boss. I didn't bother with him and kept my eyes on Su Qingyan. Su Qingyan tapped her fingertips lightly on the table, once, then again, each tap weighing on everyone's heart. This company does not keep idle employees. Her voice was not loud, but it carried undeniable authority. As of now, you are fired. Go to Human Resources immediately to complete the procedures. A collective, barely suppressed gasp swept through the conference room. A new official always starts with a bang, but her first move was this fierce firing someone right away, and doing it in front of all middle and senior management. A public execution. It was brutal. The senior supervisor's face went pale instantly. His lips trembled as he tried to plead for me, but one look from Su Qingyan froze him silent. All eyes turned to me, some sympathetic, some gloating, but most filled with the fear of being made an example of. I felt not the slightest ripple of emotion. I even wanted to laugh a little. Finally I could lie flat completely. I stood up and bowed slightly to Su Qingyan. Thank you, President Su. With that, I didn't look at anyone else and turned to walk out of the conference room. Behind me was dead silence. I could picture their stunned expressions. No anger, no begging, not even a hint of resentment, just leaving like that. And saying thank you? This guy must be out of his mind. I went back to my desk and packed my things slowly. There wasn't much to pack, really just a water cup and a nap pillow. My colleague Zhao Jiang leaned over and whispered, "Brother Fang, you're so tough. You're just leaving like that? President Su is clearly making an example out of you." I smiled. What else? Stay and argue with her? But it's such a shame to lose this job. The world is big. There's nowhere I can't lie flat. I patted his shoulder, picked up my small cardboard box, and walked out of the company building with easy confidence under countless complicated gazes. I glanced back at the building. Starting today, I don't even have to go to work anymore. Perfect. I took out my phone and sent a message to my most capable subordinate, Old Chun, known as the king of overachievers. I got fired. 3 seconds later old Chun called, his voice filled with doomsday-level panic. Young master, what happened? Which blind fool dared to fire you? I'll make him disappear from the face of the earth right now. Enough. She's just the president of a small company. Don't make a fuss. I picked at my ear. It works out, actually. I've wanted to quit for ages. By the way, what should I have for dinner? Steamed grouper or braised meatballs? Old Chun went silent on the other end of the line. I could picture his pained, disappointed expression right now. Young master ... aren't you even a little angry? Why would I be angry? I retorted. Getting fired means I don't have to work. Money gets deposited into my account every day, and I can focus on my food and wine. Isn't that the life of an immortal? Old Chun fell silent again. After a long moment, he spoke in a tone of barely contained grief and indignation. Young master, if the old master knew how unambitious you are, he'd climb right out of his coffin. Relax, he won't. I hung up, not wanting to listen to his nagging anymore. In this world, nothing matters more than making yourself comfortable. As for that iceberg female president, Su Ching Han ... let her work hard for me and my company. I hummed a little tune cheerfully as I headed home. But the moment I unlocked the door with my fingerprint and pushed it open, the smile froze on my face. In the entryway, a pair of fiery red high heels sat brazenly on my shoe rack. The style, the color, that eye-catching brand logo. My pupils constricted. I had seen those shoes just that afternoon in the conference room. They were on Su Chingen's feet. My first thought was, did I go to the wrong door? I stepped back outside and looked up at the house number. No mistake, this was my home. Then what were these shoes doing here? And I tilted my head and listened. From the direction of the bathroom came the sound of rushing water. Someone was taking a shower in my house? An absurd thought popped into my head. No, impossible. I took a deep breath, slipped on my slippers, and walked step by step toward the bathroom. My heart was beating faster for no reason. Just as I reached the bathroom door and was about to knock. Click. The door opened. A sweet fragrance mixed with damp steam washed over me. Right after, a woman wrapped in a bathrobe stepped out, drying her wet hair as she walked. When she lifted her head and saw me standing at the door, we both froze. The air seemed to solidify in that moment. The woman before me had a faint pink flush on her skin from the steam, and without her heavy work makeup, her features looked even more exquisitely perfect. Water droplets slid down the ends of her black hair, past her slender neck, and disappeared into the wide collar of her bathrobe. There was none of the cold sharpness she'd had in the conference room that afternoon. In its place was pure, unadulterated shock and confusion. It was Su Ching'an, the iceberg female president who had just fired me that same day. What was she doing here, and wearing my bathrobe? My mind raced, trying to make sense of this surreal scene before me. Su Ching'an reacted faster than I did. After a brief moment of stunned stillness, her eyes instantly turned wary and cold, even carrying a hint of menace. Who are you? How did you get in here? Her voice was low, with a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. Before I could answer, she had already stepped sideways to put distance between us, striking a defensive pose at the same time. I looked at her, somewhat amused. President Su, shouldn't I be the one asking you that? I gestured around me. This is my home. Your home? Su Ching'an frowned even deeper, her eyes full of suspicion. Impossible. This is clearly ... She stopped mid-sentence. As if remembering something, all the color drained from her face in an instant, leaving it deathly pale. She stared at me in disbelief, her lips slightly parted but not a single word came out. At the same time, a possibility I'd long pushed to the back of my mind occurred to me. Something extremely melodramatic that I'd thought would never happen to me. A child bride arrangement. My nominal father had arranged a marriage between me and the daughter of a family friend when I was very young. It was said that the old master and her grandfather had struck the deal over drinks back in the day. After I transmigrated here, I'd treated it as a joke and never taken it seriously. After all, what era was this? Who still did that sort of thing? But just last month old Chun had suddenly told me with a grave expression that the Su family intended to honor the engagement. The Su family? I remembered old Chun mentioning that the Su family granddaughter I was supposed to marry was named Su Qinggan, a business prodigy who had made a name for herself on Wall Street at a young age, and had only recently returned to China. I stared at the iceberg female president before me, wearing my bathrobe with her hair still dripping wet. The world really was a ridiculously small circle. Are Chin Fang? Su Qinggan finally found her voice, but it was filled with disillusionment. I nodded. The one and only. She stumbled back a step and grabbed the wall to keep from falling. Her stunning face twisted with an array of emotions. Shock, absurdity, humiliation, anger. I could perfectly understand how she felt right now. Imagine being a gifted, privileged young woman, forced by your family to marry a man you've never met. You fight it but fail, and have no choice but to accept it against your will. You think, even if he's a stranger with your family background, he can't be that bad. And then, on the very day you go to your fiancé's house for a surprise inspection, you realize your fiancé is the very good for nothing slacker you personally fired this afternoon, the most useless deadbeat in the entire company. This wasn't just a slap in the face. This was rubbing your face straight into the dirt over and over again. No, this can't be, she muttered, seemingly unable to accept this harsh reality. I shrugged, walked into the living room, sat down on the sofa, and poured myself a glass of water. The facts are right in front of you, President Su, I said, looking at her leisurely. Want me to get my household registration booklet to prove it? Su Qinggan stared daggers at me, her chest heaving violently. The look in her eyes said she wanted to tear me apart with her bare hands. I had a feeling that if looks could kill, I'd already be full of holes. A full minute passed before she finally forced a few words out through gritted teeth, as if draining every last ounce of her strength. I'm calling off the engagement. Calling it off? I raised an eyebrow and took a sip of water. I have no problem with that. But telling me won't do any good. You'll have to talk to both our grandfathers about it. Su Qinggan's face darkened even more. Of course she knew it wouldn't be that simple. If she could call it off, she wouldn't be here today. It was precisely because she couldn't defy her family's arrangements that she'd decided to come over first, to at least get a look at what her future husband was like. Who would have thought she'd be greeted with such a surprising face? She stood frozen in place, her fists clenched, white-knuckled, clearly caught in a fierce internal struggle. I didn't rush her. I just watched quietly. Watching this iceberg president, who had held absolute power and authority earlier that day, now looking like a cornered beast trapped with no way out. It was actually kind of amusing. This was probably the ultimate information gap between reader and protagonist, watching the other characters make fools of themselves in silence. After another long while, she finally seemed to resign herself to fate. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had returned to that icy calm. The engagement stays. For now. But I have conditions. Let's hear them. I leaned back on the sofa, getting comfortable. First, our marriage only exists to appease the elders. To the outside world we are strangers. No one can know about our relationship, especially not at the company. Fine. Second, we're just roommates under the same roof. You live your life, I live mine. No interference from either side. Works for me too. Third, double quotes. She paused, a flicker of disgust crossing her eyes. You can't keep muddling through life like you used to. Starting tomorrow, you'll be my driver and personal assistant. I'll pay you a proper salary. I need to know your whereabouts at all times. I almost laughed out loud. Her driver and personal assistant? Was she afraid her useless husband would embarrass her, so she wanted to keep me tied to her side to keep an eye on me? Interesting. President Su, have you forgotten? You fired me today. I'm rehiring you now, she said coldly. Your title is President's personal assistant. That's an order. I stroked my chin. Fine, I guess. Lying around is lying around no matter where I do it. Being her driver beats sitting in an office all day. At least I can listen to music and sleep in the car. Deal? I snapped my fingers. But I have a condition too. Su Qinggan glanced over. Speak. I'll cook all the meals at home. But you have to do the dishes. Su Qinggan froze for a second, clearly not expecting me to bring up such a condition. She sized me up, her suspicion written all over her face. You can cook? I didn't bother explaining. It's settled then. I stood up. Agreement reached. Now can you please give me back my bathrobe? Your luggage should be in the guest room, with your own things inside. Su Qingjin's face flushed bright red in an instant. The redness spread from the base of her neck all the way up to the tips of her ears. She'd only just realized she was still wrapped in my bathrobe. She shot me a fierce glare and practically fled into the guest room, slamming the door shut behind her with a loud bang. I stared at the closed door, unable to hold back the smile tugging at my lips. Iceberg President? She didn't seem all that icy after all. Life had suddenly become more interesting than brewing wine. Early the next morning, I was woken up by a sharp, insistent knocking on my door. Chin Fang, it's 7:30. Do you even want to go to work? It was Su Qingjin's voice, impatience dripping through every word, even through the door. I rubbed my eyes and picked up my phone to check the time. 7:31. Punctual as clockwork. I got out of bed slowly, washed up, and changed clothes. By the time I stepped out of my room, Su Qingjin was already sitting at the dining table, fully dressed. She had changed into a white professional suit dress. Her long hair neatly coiled up at the back of her head back to being that stunning, icy female president. Except that her beautiful face was practically screaming, I'm already sick of waiting. There was a cup of black coffee in front of her and nothing else. Where's my breakfast? She looked up at me. There's bread and milk in the fridge. The microwave is over there. I pointed toward the kitchen. Su Qingjin frowned immediately. You didn't make breakfast? Our agreement was I cook, you wash dishes. I spread my hands. Breakfast wasn't included. Besides, my breakfast was made with top-tier ingredients flown in fresh every morning. Her? She wasn't worth it. Su Qingjin pressed her lips into a thin, tight line. This was probably the first time in her life anyone had talked back to her like this. But in the end, she said nothing. She stood up, grabbed a slice of bread from the fridge, and took a bite with a cold, frosty expression. Watching her like that put me in a surprisingly good mood. Let's go, President Su. We'll be late if we don't leave soon. I picked up the car keys and twirled them in front of her. In the underground parking garage, a row of cars was parked. Su Qingjin walked straight toward the most low-key black Maybach. I got into the driver's seat and started the car skillfully. The interior was spacious, filled with a faint scent of leather. Su Qingjin sat in the back seat and immediately started going through documents the moment she got in, not saying a single word to me the entire ride. I was happy for the quiet. I turned on the stereo and put on some soothing classical music. The car drove smoothly down the road. In the rearview mirror I could see her focused profile. Her long lashes cast a small shadow beneath her eyelids. Her nose was high and straight, and her lips were perfectly shaped. I had to admit this nominal wife of mine was genuinely top tier in the looks department. Her personality, though, left a lot to be desired. When we arrived downstairs at the company, I pulled the car to a stop. We're here, President Su. She hummed in response, gathered her documents, and stepped out of the car. From start to finish, she didn't glance at me again. I pulled into the president's exclusive parking spot, then got comfortable in the seat, put on an eye mask, and went back to sleep. Being a driver was way better than sitting in an office. I slept straight through, until noon, then stretched and got out of the car, wandering over to a private restaurant I owned nearby for lunch. In the afternoon, I went back to the car and continued lazing around. It wasn't nearly quitting time when Su Qingjin called. Where are you? Her voice was still as cold as ever. In the car. Come up. 10th floor. President's office. Then she hung up. I yawned and sauntered into the company building. The receptionist's eyes went wide when she saw me. Be Brother Fang? What are you doing here? Coming to work, huh? But weren't you ... I winked at her, made a shushing gesture, and headed straight for the president's private elevator. Behind me, the receptionist and the security guard stood there completely stunned. I made my way up to the 10th floor without a hitch. Outside the president's office, Su Qingjin's secretary looked like she'd seen a ghost when she spotted me. You. What are you doing here? President Su called for me. The secretary looked skeptical, but she knocked on the door anyway. President Su Qin ... Qin. Fang is here. Send him in. I pushed the door open. The huge office was empty except for Su Qinggan. She was standing in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the bustling traffic below. Her back looked a little lonely. "What did you need me for?" I asked. She turned around and tossed a document onto the desk. "Read it." I picked it up. It was a cooperation proposal with the Lee family from the west side of the city. The Lee family was in the new energy business, and they'd been gaining a lot of traction lately. The Lee family wants to cooperate with us on developing a piece of land. "I've read the proposal and it's very favorable for us," Su Qinggan said. "But Vice President Wang and the others are against it, saying the risk is too high." I flipped through the proposal and smiled. This Vice President Wang was the same guy who'd thrown me under the bus to curry favor with her in the conference room yesterday. What did he know about risk? He was against it purely because he'd wanted that land himself, only for the Lee family to snatch it first. Now that the Lee family wanted to cooperate, he was bitter and naturally wanted to throw a wrench in the works. "President Su wants my opinion? You're my assistant now. This is your job, my opinion. Sign it." I closed the document. "Not just sign it as fast as possible." Su Qinggan looked at me, her gaze scrutinizing. "Reason?" "No reason. Just a gut feeling." I lied. The real reason was that my personal intelligence network had sent me a report just yesterday. The government would be rolling out new energy support policies next month. And that plot of land in the west side was right in the core planning zone. Locking it down now would mean massive profits. But of course I couldn't tell her that. Su Qinggan frowned again. "Gut feeling?" She let out a cold laugh. "Qin Feng, do you think this is some kind of game? Believe what you want." I shrugged indifferently. "It's your company anyway. Any losses won't come out of my pocket. If there's nothing else, I'm heading home." With that I turned to leave. "Stop!" Su Qinggan called out to me. I turned back and saw her looking at me with an incredibly complicated expression. Struggle, doubt, and a flicker of hesitation. She didn't even seem aware of herself. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. "Tomorrow you're coming with me to meet Mr. Lee." The next day I drove Su Qinggan to the tea house where we had arranged to meet Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee was a middle-aged man in his 40s, pot-bellied, with an amiable smile on his face. But as soon as he sat down, he got straight to the point. "President Su, I've long heard of your reputation. You've read the proposal, so I won't beat around the bush. Put simply, are you taking on this project or not? If not, President Zheng from the east side of the city is still waiting for my answer." It was a classic business negotiation tactic, creating a sense of urgency to force the other party into a decision. Su Qinggan was clearly an old hand at this. She picked up her teacup, blew gently on the steam, and said unhurriedly, "There's no need to rush, Mr. Lee. A project this big deserves careful consideration. There are still some differing opinions within our company that need to be aligned." "Ha ha, President Su, business is like a battlefield. Opportunities vanish in the blink of an eye, Mr. Lee said with a chuckle. "I can wait one more day at most. If you can't give me a definite answer by noon tomorrow, we'll have to call off this cooperation." With that, he stood up and took his leave. Only Su Qinggan and I were left in the private room. She held her teacup and said nothing for a long time, her beautiful eyebrows furrowed tightly. I knew what she was hesitating about. Vice President Wang and his gang must have put a lot of pressure on her. If this project failed, her position as the newly appointed president would likely become untenable. Still, thinking about it, I broke the silence. She lifted her head and looked at me sharply. "Yesterday you told me to sign. Do you still think so now?" "Of course. I want a reason that can convince me, not just gut feeling." I looked at her and suddenly felt a little amused. She was the one asking for my opinion. Yet now she was acting like she was interrogating me. I set down my teacup, leaned forward slightly, and moved a little closer to her. "President Su, do you believe in fate?" She froze. I lowered my voice and said in a deliberately mysterious tone, "Last night, I observed the celestial signs. The purple star has shifted eastward, and the wealth palace is glowing brightly. It's an extremely auspicious omen that good fortune falls on the west side of the city." Su Qinggan. She looked at me as if I were a street con artist. Or rather a lunatic. I held back my laughter and continued in all seriousness. Trust me this once. Sign it. Within a month you'll be rolling in profits. By then your position in the company will be rock solid and no one will be able to shake it. The corner of Su Qing'an's mouth twitched. She probably wanted to yell at me, but her good upbringing held her back. She picked up her teacup and took a sip, as if trying to drown her unspoken anger with tea. Qin Fang, she set down her cup and said slowly, enunciating each word, "If this loses money, you get out of my house. Deal?" When we got home, Su Qing'an locked herself in the study and didn't come out again. I was happy for the peace and quiet. I put on an apron and walked into the kitchen. I was in a good mood today, so I decided to make Buddha jumps over the wall as a treat for myself. All kinds of top-tier ingredients moved swiftly in my hands, and soon a rich, overpowering aroma filled the kitchen. By the time I ladled the Buddha jumps over the wall out of the slow-simmering clay pot, it was already dark. I carried a bowl of the golden, rich, mellow soup to the dining table and was about to enjoy it. The study door clicked open. Su Qing'an stepped out looking somewhat exhausted. She'd probably been arguing back and forth with Vice President Wang and his people all afternoon. When she caught the unignorable fragrance in the air, she froze mid-step. Her gaze fell on the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall in front of me. Then her stomach growled loudly, completely out of place. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet dining room, it was unmistakably clear. Su Qing'an's face flushed red at a visible speed. I fought back a smile and scooped up a spoonful of abalone, putting it in my mouth. Perfectly cooked, soft, tender, and springy. Finished. Working, President Su? I asked, pretending not to know why she was there. She ignored me and walked straight to the fridge, yanking the door open. Then she saw the empty fridge. There was nothing inside except a few bottles of mineral water. She closed the fridge, turned around, and stared daggers at me. The look in her eyes seemed to say, "Where are my bread and milk?" I took another slow sip of soup. Oh, the weather was nice today, so I cleaned out the fridge. Threw away everything that was expired. Su Qing'an's chest began to rise and fall with anger. I scooped up a piece of sea cucumber and kept eating. Smooth and silky, it melts in your mouth. Qin Fang, she finally snapped. I looked up at her with an innocent expression. She seemed about to say something, but held back in the end and turned to go back to the study. Wait, I called after her. She stopped but didn't turn around. I brought another bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall from the kitchen and set it on the table in front of her. Here. It's yours. Su Qing'an's body went rigid. She turned around slowly, staring at the steaming, fragrant bowl of soup on the table with undisguised disbelief. The agreement says I cook and you wash dishes. I shrugged. Naturally I made you a portion. She stood there, looking from the bowl to me, her lips moving but no words coming out. I could see something quietly melting in those eyes of hers that always seemed frozen over. That night she didn't eat much, but she finished every last drop of the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall I'd served her. After dinner, she walked into the kitchen without a word and started washing the dishes. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her clumsy movements. It was obvious she'd never done housework a day in her life. She washed one plate 3 times. Need help? I asked. No, she said without turning around, her voice stiff. I smiled and said nothing more. The next day, Su Qing'an walked into work with a spring in her step. She called an emergency senior management meeting and announced in front of everyone that she was signing the deal with the Li family. Vice President Wang blew up on the spot, slamming his fist on the table and accusing her of being headstrong and leading the company into disaster. Su Qing'an just gave him a cold look. I am the president, and I make the decisions. I take full responsibility for this project. If anything goes wrong, I will resign and take the blame. In that moment, the boldness radiating from her was actually kind of captivating. Of course, I knew she'd never have to resign. Because on the 3rd day after she signed the contract, the government officially rolled out support policies for the new energy industry. Overnight, the value of that plot of land on the west side increased tenfold. The company's stock price hit the daily limit for 3 straight days. The entire company was ecstatic. Everyone looked at Su Qing'an like she was some kind of genius oracle. They said she had a sharp eye, incredible courage, and was a born business prodigy. Vice President Wong and his cronies had their egos thoroughly bruised. They all looked like wilted eggplants, not daring to say another word. Only I knew that this so-called business prodigy had paced back and forth in the study for 3 whole hours the night before signing, paralyzed with nerves. That night, for the first time ever, she didn't work overtime. When she got home, I was on the balcony sealing the jars of my newly brewed peach blossom wine. She walked over to me and looked at the beautiful glass jars. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "Thank me for what?" "I just told you to trust your gut," I said, patting the sealing clay on the jar. She was silent for a moment, then suddenly asked, "Do you really know how to read celestial signs?" I almost choked. "Lady, I was making that up." "You actually believed me?" I turned my head and saw her looking at me earnestly. A genuine flicker of curiosity in those clear eyes of hers. I suddenly thought, this iceberg president is actually kind of cute. Ever since the new energy project became a resounding success, Su Chingan's prestige in the company had reached its peak. The way she looked at me had changed too. She still didn't exactly smile at me, but that icy disgust had faded considerably. In its place was a kind of curiosity and scrutiny I couldn't quite decipher. She seemed determined to figure out what kind of person I really was. A good-for-nothing slacker who didn't even care about getting fired. A culinary genius who could whip up top-tier Buddha jumps over the wall like it was nothing. A genius who could judge $100 million projects by reading the stars, her own wild assumption. How could all these completely contradictory identities exist in one single person? She couldn't figure it out, so she started watching me. I could feel it, whether at home or at the company when I was driving her. There was always a gaze lingering on me, faint but persistent. I was happy to play along with this little cat and mouse game of hers. Life was too dull otherwise. You had to find some entertainment. That day, after work, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I went to a high-end gym that I owned. Lying flat is one thing, but staying in shape is still important. 8-pack abs and a V-line are a man's best outfit. I changed into a tank top and worked up a sweat in the weight area. The rush of dopamine made me feel amazing all over. "Wow, you have such an amazing body." A clear, sweet voice sounded beside me. I turned and saw a girl in pink sportswear looking up at me with big, doe-like eyes, full of admiration. The girl was sweet looking, with her hair in a high ponytail, radiating youthful energy. I smiled at her in greeting. "I'm Lin Wanwan. What's your name?" She leaned over familiarly. "Chin Fang." "Chin Fang? That's such a nice name." Lin Wanwan's eyes crinkled into crescents. "I just joined this gym. Can I work out with you from now on? You look like such a pro." "Sure," I said indifferently. Having a workout buddy wasn't so bad. For the next hour, Lin Wanwan followed me around like a little shadow. Whatever exercise I did, she did too. When I did bench presses, she stood beside me counting reps and cheering me on. "Wow, 100 kilograms. You're amazing. Juge, your arm lines are so gorgeous. Oh my gosh, are those 8-pack abs? Can I touch them?" Me, double quotes. This girl was way too straightforward. Before I could refuse, she had already reached out and poked my abs lightly with her finger. Then she yanked her hand back like she'd been shocked, her face bright red. "They're so hard." I smiled helplessly. What a little firecracker. Lin Wanwan and I hit it off really well. She was cheerful, like a little sun, and being around her just put you in a good mood. We made plans to work out together next time, then went our separate ways home. I didn't think anything of it at all. But what I didn't know was that in another corner of the gym, Su Kingan's secretary was furiously snapping photos of our backs as we left. The next day, when I drove Su Kingan to work, I could feel the tension in the car. She didn't say a word the whole ride, her face even colder than usual. She even frowned at the classical music I was playing, said it was too loud, and told me to turn it off. I was confused, but didn't ask any questions. Women, right? They always have those few days a month when they're in a bad mood. When we arrived at the company and she got out of the car, she suddenly asked out of the blue, "Where did you go yesterday?" "To the gym," I answered truthfully. "With who?" I froze for a second, then realized she probably already knew about Lin Wanwan. A friend. Su Qingjin's face turned even icier. She slammed the car door shut and walked away without looking back. I watched her back and touched my nose. Was she jealous? No way, we were just a contract couple. Hadn't she always despised me? I didn't dwell on it and went back to lazing around in the car. But by evening I realized things weren't that simple. I made dinner as usual, Westlake vinegar fish and Longjing shrimp today. Su Qingqin came out of the study, saw the spread of food on the table, said nothing, and sat down to eat. I ladled her a bowl of soup, but she didn't touch it.
What's wrong?
Did someone give you a hard time at work today, President Su? I asked first. She lifted her eyelids and glanced at me. No. Then why do you look so upset? I'm not upset. Fine if you say so. I ate on my own. The dining room was eerily quiet, only the faint clink of chopsticks and bowls breaking the silence. Who is this Lin Wanwan? She spoke up suddenly. I almost choked on a fishbone. Cough. How do you know about her? I'm asking you who she is. Su Qingjin's tone brooked no argument. I met her at the gym. She's a really cheerful girl, I explained. Girl? Su Qingjin let out a cold laugh. Qin Fang, your taste really is as bad as ever. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. She put down her chopsticks and wiped her mouth with a napkin. Just a reminder, don't embarrass me out there. Don't forget our agreement. With that she stood up and went back to the study. I stared at her resolute back and the barely touched food on the table, and a wave of unexplained anger rose in my chest. Totally out of nowhere. This woman was way too nosy. What happened to no interference from either side? Just because I talked to another girl for a few minutes, she had to give me the cold shoulder? And she said I had bad taste? Lin Wanwan was such a sweet girl. What was wrong with her? Way better than you, the ice queen who never smiles. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I pulled out my phone and sent Lin Wanwan a message. Free tomorrow? Let's get dinner. Lin Wanwan replied instantly. I'm free. I'm so free. You finally asked me out, Coog. I'm so happy. There was a whole string of confetti celebration emojis after it. I looked at the screen and finally felt a little better. Humph, Su Qingjin. If you won't eat, there are plenty of people who will. For the next few days, Su Qingjin and I were in a cold war. She left early and came home late every day, and barely spoke to me at home. She either skipped the meals I made or only took a couple of bites. I was happy for the peace. Every day I either went to the gym to see Lin Wanwan, or took her out to try all kinds of delicious food. Lin Wanwan was a total foodie, and she was sweet with her words, always dishing out compliments. Every time I cooked something or took her somewhere nice to eat, she looked so happy and full of admiration. Qin Fangguj, you're so amazing. How can there be such a perfect man like you in the world? Being admired like that stroked my little ego quite nicely. Being with her made me feel like I was back in college, in that simple, happy kind of love. And all of this was reported to Su Qingjin in full detail by her secretary. Photos, videos, everything. I had no idea how Su Qingjin felt when she saw all of it. All I knew was that the atmosphere at home got colder and colder with each passing day. Until one day a bombshell exploded and shook the entire company. Zhao Group from the east side of the city suddenly announced a hostile takeover of our company. Zhao Wei, the heir of Zhao Group, was a notorious playboy who threw his family's money around and bullied everyone in the circle. He'd had it out for Su Qingjin for a long time, thinking what right did a woman have to be above him. This time, he'd somehow secured a huge investment and came at us hard, clearly intent on swallowing Su Qingjin's company whole. The company's stock price plummeted and panic spread like wildfire. Su Qingjin called several emergency meetings, but they did little good. Zhao Wei had come prepared this time. With deep pockets and ruthless tactics, he had Su Qingjin outmatched. At every turn. Watching Su Qingjin's face grow more haggard and her dark circles get darker by the day, I actually felt a twinge of pity. That night she worked overtime again and didn't come home until midnight. I made her a bowl of noodles. She sat at the dining table and ate in silence, not saying a word. When she finished, she put the bowl in the sink and just leaned there, motionless. I walked over and realized her shoulders were shaking slightly. She was crying. It was the first time I'd seen this strong woman show such a vulnerable side. Something inside me twinged softly. I reached out, wanting to pat her shoulder, but I stopped halfway. What were we anyway? We weren't close enough for me to comfort her, were we? Need help? I asked in the end. She didn't turn around, her voice thick with a stuffy nose. No. Zhao Wei has someone powerful pulling the strings behind him. His funding comes from Qin Group. I said it casually. Su Qingyan's body jolted violently. She turned around, her red-rimmed eyes filled with shock. Qin Group? That legendary ... reclusive conglomerate? Yeah. I nodded. Zhao Wei is just a pawn they put out front. Qin Group was my family's business. And that so-called powerful someone was my overachieving subordinate, old Chun. He'd set this whole thing up behind my back. In his words, it was to let you experience the thrill of corporate warfare. Young master, and test the young madams, what he called Su Qingyan privately. Abilities at the same time. When I found out, I was so angry I almost shipped him off to Africa to work in the mines. Thrill my ass. I just wanted to lie flat and do nothing. But now seeing Su Qingyan cornered like this, I suddenly thought old Chun's plan wasn't completely useless. How do you know all this? Su Qingyan stared at me intently like she was trying to spot a lie on my face. I have my sources, I said mysteriously. What you need to do right now isn't cry here. It's figure out how to beat Zhao Wei at the bidding conference in 3 days. In 3 days, there was the most important commercial project bidding conference in the city. Whoever won this project would hold an unbeatable position in the corporate battles ahead. It would be the final showdown between Zhao Wei and Su Qingyan. Su Qingyan looked at me, her expression shifting again and again. Finally, she wiped away her tears, and determination returned to her eyes. I understand. On the day of the bidding conference, all the business elites of the city gathered together. The venue was filled with elegantly dressed people, glasses clinking and laughter flowing. Su Qingyan wore a white evening gown, like a white lotus blooming on a snowy mountain top, cold, elegant, and noble. But her clenched fists still gave away her nervousness. As her driver and assistant, I wore an ordinary suit and followed behind her. Soon we spotted our old rival Zhao Wei. He was surrounded by a crowd of people, looking smug and triumphant. When he saw Su Qingyan, he sauntered over with a glass in his hand. Well, if it isn't President Su. What? You actually dared to show up today? He said sarcastically. I'd advise you to go home early. Don't humiliate yourself here. Su Qingyan looked at him coldly. Worry about yourself first, President Zhao. He who laughs last laughs best. Zhao Wei laughed like he'd heard the funniest joke ever. Su Qingyan, you really don't know when you're beaten. Do you actually think you can take me on? He stepped closer and lowered his voice, so only the few of us could hear. I'll let you in on a secret. My backer this time is the famous Qin Group. What do you have to fight me with, huh? He looked at Su Qingyan smugly, waiting for her to panic. Su Qingyan's face did go pale. Even though she'd already heard it from me, having Zhao Wei confirm it to her face was still a shock, and she swayed slightly. Zhao Wei's gaze then fell on me. He looked me up and down, his eyes full of contempt and disdain. Well, if it isn't that loser President Su fired. What? Now you're her little errand boy. Birds of a feather really do flock together. A failing female president paired with a useless deadbeat perfect match. He doubled over laughing, and the people around him joined in with a roar of laughter. Su Qingyan's face flushed bright red in an instant. Not because she was being humiliated, but because of me. She stepped sharply in front of me, glaring at Zhao Wei. Zhao Wei, watch your mouth. I stared at her back as she stood up for me, feeling a little surprised. Zhao Wei laughed even harder. What? Already feeling sorry for him? Su Qingyan, I really don't understand you more and more. You pass up so many talented young men and go for a useless deadbeat like this. No wonder your company is going under. Just then, the main doors of the venue were suddenly pushed open from outside. An energetic old man in a traditional Chinese tunic suit walked in, surrounded by a group of bodyguards in black. The moment he appeared, the entire venue fell silent. Everyone looked at him with awe. Old Chun. The smile froze on Zhao Wei's face. He quickly left us and scurried over to greet him obsequiously. Old Chun, what brings you here? What a rare honor. Please come right in. The man was none other than my overachieving subordinate, Old Chun, president of Chin Group's Asia-Pacific region. To the outside world he was the supreme authority of Chin Group, a figure countless people looked up to. Zhao Wei bowed and scraped, reaching out to support Old Chun. But Old Chun didn't even glance at him. He walked straight past. He made his way through the crowd and under everyone's stunned gazes, walked step by step until he stood before me. Then he did something that made every single person in the room's eyes nearly pop out of their heads. He bowed deeply and respectfully to me, a full 90-degree bow. Young master. His voice echoed clearly through the deathly silent venue. Everything is ready. Awaiting your orders. Time seemed to stand still. You could hear a pin drop in the entire hall. Everyone was frozen in place as if petrified, all wearing the same dazed, disbelieving expression. The obsequious smile was still frozen on Zhao Wei's lips, looking utterly ridiculous. His eyes were wide as saucers, his mouth gaping open big enough to fit an egg, and he stared at Old Chun and me like he'd seen a ghost. And Su Qinggan, standing in front of me, slowly turned around. She looked at me, and in those beautiful eyes of hers, there was first confusion, then shock, then disbelief, and finally, utter blankness. Her prized calm and rationality crumbled to pieces in that moment. I sighed helplessly at the chaotic scene before me. I raised a hand and rubbed the space between my eyebrows. Old Chun, didn't I tell you not to make such a big fuss? My laid-back do-nothing life was completely over. Old Chun straightened up, his face full of loyal devotion, as if to say it's all for your own good. Young master, some petty people won't learn their lesson unless you teach them one. As he spoke, his gaze sliced like a blade toward Zhao Wei, who had already gone deathly pale. Zhao Wei's body shook like a leaf. Young master? He stared at me, his voice trembling violently. You're from Chin Group. You're too loud, I cut him off impatiently. Old Chun, deal with him properly. I don't want to see him again. Yes, young master. Old Chun waved a hand, and two of the black-clad bodyguards behind him stepped forward immediately, dragging the limp Zhao Wei out like a dead dog. A collective gasp rippled through the venue. Everyone looked at me like I was some kind of deity or a demon. A single glance had decided the fate of a $10 billion corporation. What terrifying power that was! The people who had been laughing at me along with Zhao Wei just moments ago all went pale as sheets, wishing the ground would swallow them whole. I paid these ants no mind. My gaze settled on Su Qinggan. She was still standing there, motionless, like an exquisite statue, except that those beautiful eyes of hers were now brimming with tears. I walked over to her. So, do you still think I have bad taste? We didn't say a word the whole way home. The atmosphere in the car was suffocating. Su Qinggan sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window the entire ride, not saying a single word. I could see her pale profile and slightly reddened eyes reflected in the window glass. I knew she needed time to process everything that had happened that day. The useless loser she'd always looked down on, even personally fired, had turned out to be someone so far above her, she couldn't even dream of reaching him. A shock this earth-shattering was enough to break anyone's composure. When we got home, she silently changed her shoes and tried to lock herself in her room. Wait, I called after her. She stopped, her back still to me. We need to talk. I went and sat down on the living room sofa, pouring myself a glass of water. She hesitated for a long time before turning around and sitting down on the sofa across from me. She sat perfectly straight, hands on her knees like a prisoner awaiting judgment. Ask whatever you want, I said. She lifted her head and looked at me, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Those eyes that had once been cold and sharp were now full of fragility and helplessness. I sighed inwardly at the sight of her. Why did you lie to me? It was a long time before she found her voice again, and it was hoarse and ragged. I didn't lie to you, I said. I never said I wasn't the heir of Chin Group. You just never asked. She froze. That was true. She'd never asked. From the very beginning she'd labeled me a loser, a deadbeat fool. Never amount to anything. She'd assumed from the start that I was a good-for-nothing man who needed her charity and her discipline. She hadn't even bothered to look into my family background, because in her eyes I wasn't worth it. So double quotes, she let out a bitter laugh, tears sliding down her cheeks. You've been laughing at me this whole time, haven't you? Watching me act like a fool, thinking I had everything under control. Watching me fire you, then cleverly keep you by my side as my assistant. Watching me stress out over a project that you could fix with the snap of your fingers? Chen Fang, do you think I'm a total joke? Her voice trembled more with each word, growing more and more desperate. I looked at her and said nothing. She was right about some of it. At first, I really had just been watching for entertainment. But then later, I didn't know exactly when, but my feelings had changed. Seeing how hard she worked made me feel a certain admiration. Seeing the satisfied look on her face when she ate my food made me happy. Seeing her get jealous over Lin Wanwan made me feel secretly pleased. Seeing her stand up to Zhao Wei to defend me made me feel a little moved. Yes, I finally nodded. At first I was. She closed her eyes and 2 clear tears slid silently down her face. But I changed my tone. Not anymore. Her eyes flew open, and she looked at me in confusion. I stood up, walked over to her and knelt down so our eyes were level. I reached out and gently brushed the tears from her face with my thumb. Her body trembled slightly. Su Qinggan, you're an incredible woman, I said seriously, looking her in the eye. You're smart, strong, and bold. Even without me, you could run the company perfectly well. You're just too stubborn, too hard on yourself. You're like a hedgehog wearing armor, never letting anyone get close. But I know that under all that armor you have a soft heart. I smiled as I watched her eyes widen at my words. As for Lin Wanwan, I paused. She's a lovely girl like a little sun. But the sun is too bright, too overwhelming. I prefer icebergs. When I finished speaking, Su Qinggan froze completely. She stared at me blankly, forgetting to cry, forgetting to breathe. Those beautiful eyes of hers were filled with utter disbelief. Looking at her cute, dazed expression, my mischievous side came out again. I leaned closer and lowered my voice, asking in an ambiguous tone. President Su. Do you still want to call off the engagement? Her face flushed bright red in an instant. She looked like a startled little rabbit, her eyes darting everywhere nervously, anywhere but at me. She stammered I over and over but couldn't get a full sentence out. Watching her flustered, incoherent state, I couldn't hold back a low laugh. So this is what an iceberg looks like when it melts. This cute? I stood up and sat back down on the sofa, watching her leisurely. You have 3 minutes to think about it. Time's up after that. Su Qinggan's face turned even redder. She kept her head down, twisting the hem of her dress nervously with her fingers, like a student waiting for her grades. I watched my watch and counted down slowly. 1 minute left, 30 seconds. 10, 9, 8, Right as I got to 3, she suddenly lifted her head. No. Her voice was loud and urgent, with a hint of desperate resolve. After saying it, she collapsed back onto the sofa like she'd used up all her strength, breathing heavily. I looked at her, and the smile on my lips grew wider and wider. Good. I stood up and held out my hand to her. Then, Miss Su, please take care of me from today on. She stared at my outstretched hand, stunned for a moment. Then she held out her own hand and placed it gently in my palm. Her hand was cool and soft. I closed my fingers around hers. I'm Chin Fang. Fang as in unbridled. From today on, you can do whatever you want to me, openly and above board. Her face flushed once again, red as if it were about to bleed. I pulled her to her feet and drew her into my arms. Her body went rigid, but she didn't push me away. I could feel her long, frozen heart slowly melting in my embrace. Outside the window, the moonlight was perfect. Our story had only just begun. This story teaches us not to judge people hastily based on superficial impressions. When the heroine first met the male lead, she thought he was lazy and worthless and fired him publicly, unaware that he was the real power behind the enterprise. They lived together due to an engagement arranged by their elders. After spending time side by side, She gradually discovered his outstanding cooking skills and sharp business vision, which allowed him to accurately predict market opportunities. She once looked down on him with prejudice and grew jealous out of misunderstanding. It was not until a corporate conflict exposed his true identity that her prejudice faded completely. Prejudice blinds us. To evaluate others fairly, we must set aside stereotypes. Observe and understand them deeply, to see their true abilities and inner character.